employees with customers reflects directly on the company. In addition, it is important that companies be able to ensure that these employees comply fully with corporate policies, as well as federal and state statutes ranging from telemarketing fraud to such laws as the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act, which prohibits abusive and harassing type tactics. But S516 is not limited to customer service or other telephone operators. Many of NAM's member companies have been able to cut cost reduction and boost quality through the use of telephone equipment that automatically monitors the productivity of each employee and even entire factories. This has helped to streamline production processes and make U.S. industry more competitive. NAM is concerned that the bill may make it more difficult to use this information in establishing production goals. And again, in response to Senator Metzenbaum's earlier question about productivity, I do want to emphasize that most of the references within NAM's testimony to productivity, we're looking at the bill in totality, not simply its effect on the customer service reps and the operators, but again, it's been lost a lot in this debate, is that it is affecting the creation of computer-aided manufacturing, or will hinder the use of that in the future, because a lot of it is based, obviously, on computerized information. And again, our testimony goes into that a little bit deeper. In addition, as Mr. Ruffalo said, S516 will hinder corporate security efforts. For example, is a company supposed to notify somebody suspected of breaching security that from henceforth their calls and computers will be monitored? In addition, what can an employer do in the situation of a secure area that is monitored by video and/or audio devices, and employees begin to exercise their First Amendment rights by talking about current events or wearing buttons? Is the employer expected to turn off the camera or the sound? NAM opposes any legislation that will interfere with the ability of modern and future equipment that can assist domestic companies in their fight to remain competitive. Otherwise, the United States may as well let the information age pass it by. If I can just say one more thing, Senator. When I was talking earlier about the importance of companies being able to monitor to ensure compliance with corporate policies such as courteousness, et cetera, I think as a senator, you might want to keep track of other legislation that is wending its way through Congress dealing with telemarketing fraud and changing a lot of the ways that some of the telemarketing companies do business. Congress obviously is going to put the burden and the onus of enforcing these new laws, as well as other state statutes, specifically with telemarketing. Again, with Fair Debt Collections Practices Act, all of that is on the employer. And again, when you think about a signaling light, if there's a change in a law with a telemarketer, for instance, they probably will not want to change in many ways. But if they see that light go on, they're going to change for their supervisor, and they're going to change their lines like they're supposed to have. And it will take a long time, a lot longer for that company to root out the people that they maybe have problems with. Granted, customers will start complaining, and the attorneys general may start complaining, but it will take a lot longer to find out what's going on.
Mr. Merlis, happy to have a witness whose last name I can pronounce properly.
And a former constituent. Mr. Chairman, I'm Edward Merlis, Vice President, Policy and Planning of the Air Transport Association of America. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the position of the ATA member airlines on S516, Privacy for Consumers and Workers Act. Our members collectively account for approximately 97% of the revenue passenger miles flown in the United States and over 95% of the freight ton miles. We fly more than 19,000 passenger flights each day and carry nearly 1.3 million passengers on those flights. We use some 4,300 aircraft and employ 545,000 persons to perform these services. If ever there were an industry for which an electronic data collection and interpretation system is essential, it is the airline industry. Unfortunately, the broad sweep of S516 has the potential to undermine the safety, security, and consumer protection practices which our industry has adopted over the course of many years. Many of these practices are a direct result of federal aviation regulations which would conflict with the requirements of S516. While my written statement goes into some detail on those matters, I'd just like to review a few of them. Let me begin by discussing security. A fundamental component of effective security is that systems are covert. To require, quote, a signal light, beeping tone, verbal notification, or other form of visual or oral notice of electronic monitoring, close quote, as prescribed by Section 3B3 is tantamount to providing a roadmap to those intent on breaching security. A potential perpetrator of a crime who is outside the audible or visual range of the light beeping tone or verbal notification is also of necessity outside the range of the monitoring device. Thus, the establishment of this requirement alone would compromise a particularly important component of our security systems. Many aircraft and airport security measures have been instituted in order to comply with federal aviation regulations to restrict and monitor access to secure areas. Institution of the requirements proposed in this bill would clearly lessen levels of security, perhaps sufficiently to fail to comply with the FAA regulations for which those requirements were instituted. The airline industry engages in electronic monitoring and data collection and retention of that data in order to comply with a host of other federal aviation regulations concerned with flight crew schedules and hours of duty, aircraft accident investigations, and maintenance activities, to name but three. All employees subject to this monitoring know of its existence and the compilation of the data derived from this monitoring. Three aspects of the bill interfere, though, with our routine practices in this regard. The notification pursuant to 3A is superfluous and costly. Very costly, I might add, for as we read the bill, if a software enhancement were to result in additional data being collected, which might be personally identifiable, a new notice would have to be issued because the previous notice was now inaccurate. Outside consultants called upon to review safety-related data to improve the sanctity of our air transportation system are, by the terms of Section 5B, precluded from reviewing this material if it is all personally identifiable. The Section 3B3 requirements for oral, or visual notice of electronic monitoring are obtrusive and would divert from the attention which should be paid, for example, by a crew flying an airplane. The third major area in which the industry uses monitoring is to further the interests of our cargo customers and our passengers. One of the hallmarks of the overnight package delivery business has been their outstanding reliability. This reliability is due to these delivery services maintaining extensive monitoring capabilities which track packages from pickup to delivery. Employee notification of these techniques is superfluous. Most of the employees about whom data is being tracked generate the data themselves. As a matter of fact, this is the device which United Parcel Service uses, and its employees enter the data, know full well what all the data is, and therefore to require a notice would be just an extra burden on and cost on the company. The customer benefits from these electronic monitoring capabilities, without which these companies would be less distinguishable than the Postal Service. With regard to our passenger operations, less than 1% of our reservations agents' calls are monitored for quality assurance and compliance with federal law. Inasmuch as the industry has a complex series of frequently changing schedules and fares, this monitoring is designed to identify training and staffing needs to satisfy our customers. Intermittent monitoring of telephone reservation lines and analysis of the data and performance characteristics observed assist the carriers and the employees in fulfilling customer needs and expectations. Furthermore, we are faced with legal obligations to disclose certain information pursuant to the Department of Transportation's Consumer Protection regulations. While passengers may not request this information, failure to provide it is subject to stiff fines. All telephone reservations employees are aware they are subject to being monitored, and to require a signal whenever monitoring is taking place would defeat the quality assurance objectives of the monitoring. Mr. Chairman, I've highlighted only a few of our concerns with S516. The written statement contains more detail and additional areas. Needless to say, after enduring $4 billion in losses in 1990, we should not be confronted with new, expensive, and unwarranted requirements which are superfluous and have the potential to undermine passenger and crew security and long-established safety systems. I'll be pleased to respond to any questions which you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Merles. You heard the earlier witness mention the newer practice of Northwestern Airlines.
Right.
Are you critical of that new practice?
Not at all. I think it's great that Ms. Morell has such positive attitude toward her job, and she acknowledged that she's benefited from the new monitoring which they've instituted. One thing she did say was that S516, and I'll quote, will probably not affect the way Northwest monitors, close quote. Regrettably, I think she's wrong. S516 would require a disruptive beep tone on the line when she's being monitored. S516 would require a new written notice anytime a software change resulted in different data being collected. S516 would reduce the safety of the parking lot where employees park their cars by reducing the level of security in that lot. And S516 would reduce the safety of the planes that she flies and the airports through which she might work. So while I agree, and I think it's wonderful,
use the beep and have no adverse experience at all. Some of the questions that I mentioned to Mr. Ruffalo, and I think his testimony particularly, we can accommodate some things. And when there are security questions, we can work things out. Mr. Finneran, do you think Germany and Japan have made a mistake in not going in this direction? And they also seem to have increased productivity, greater increased productivity than we do.
Well, I would say NAM just opposes just enactment of this legislation. Again, we don't oppose enlightened management like Northwest Airlines, but we think in particular this legislation just goes way too far. I'm not familiar with any of the laws in Japan or Germany, technically, but for instance, this legislation that you have will affect electronic mail systems. It will make it illegal for an employer, for instance, to confront employees that it may have found out through electronic mail system one way or the other, organizing a racist rally, because it is illegal to maintain, collect, etc., information that is not of personal nature, that is not relevant to an employee's work performance. And that is not necessarily relevant. And again, I just think that the legislation goes way too far. And again, I do want to emphasize NAM does not think any legislation of any form is necessary, but we do not oppose the notification upon employment by any means. And so I think that is fine.
Let me just say, and I won't get into all the specifics because I have to get on to another meeting, but many of the criticisms, frankly, are a misreading of the law, or we can clarify and make sure that they don't go in the direction that you're talking about. Mr. Finneran, what would you think of your employer, NAM, monitoring your phone conversations and what you do?
Well, I think, first of all, I was, again, in a job where I was monitored, and it didn't bother me at all in that customer service, more telemarketing type of job. And again, I think that you have to put some of these jobs in perspective. For instance, I do not monitor my secretary. I don't care if she has personal phone calls. I know she does, but she gets her job done, and that's what's important to me. Yes. However, excuse me, I am not normally a first contact with a customer who doesn't know the company at all. And I think, especially if you're dealing with cold call situations and telemarketing, or again with customer service, the only effective way, and again from my own experience having been on the phone, the only effective way to really know what is being said is to do it randomly and silently.
Do you think your secretary would do a more effective job if you did monitor, or a less effective job? Frankly, I really wouldn't want to, but I know where you're getting at, and all I can say is if my employer did go ahead and monitor every single one of my calls, that would be a signal to me that if I was going to make a personal call or a personal nature, to go down, go to a pay phone or another non-monitored phone, if I wanted to do such. Other than that, just stick to it. Now, again, some of the examples cited by Ms. Cameron and again in today's Wall Street Journal do not make for great workplaces. I'll be the first to admit that. And I think that, as NAM says in its testimony, like any other management tool or management technique, this practice can be used well or it can be abused, and to the extent that it's abused, you're going to see a decrease in employee morale. Probably productivity will be negatively decreased if it's abused, and we don't deny that. We are just saying that we don't think that there's cause for legislation in this area.
Mr. Ruffalo, someone suggested to me if there's too much resistance to this, that we simply accept the practice, but just add a provision that employees also have the right to monitor employers. What would you think of that approach?
Well, first of all,
I say as a former businessman myself, I don't know that I would particularly
first of all,
like that.
I'm not in favor, as a philosophy, of monitoring employees, okay? I think it's counterproductive, although there might be some business that's a good way to, that's the way you track how things are going, but I certainly don't know of any. That's not what I'm here for. What you should be doing is trusting your employees, and they're going to treat you likewise. They're going to give you some respect. We certainly don't do anything like that, nor do I know anybody that does that. Okay?
Yeah, good. And I think you have some constructive suggestions here. We appreciate your testimony. We will be moving ahead. Frankly, we'll be getting back to all three of you. I hope we can work out something that I'm not saying that the National Manufacturers Association is going to endorse our bill, but if we can get a bill that meets some of the concerns, as well as the air transport, as you know, I'm in a state with a huge number of people who have an economic interest in the air industry. I want it to be a thriving industry, and I want it to be a safe industry. But I also think that we have a problem, and it's not just, 5 years from now, there's going to be some other new technology we're going to have to deal with, and there is a sensible restraint that we have to work out, and I hope we can work that out. Senator Thurmond wanted to be here, as well as Senator Kassebaum. They may submit questions to all of the witnesses. We will keep the record open for 2 days in case other members of the Senate wish to submit questions. Thank you very, very much. Our hearing stands.
Thank you, sir.
They know Senator Thurman's on the Armed Services. I'm on the Defense Appropriations Committee. We're going to be looking at it very, very closely, and we're going along with what's for the best interest of the United States Navy and our national defense. Do you think the Charleston has a future in the Navy? Oh, goodness, no question about that, yeah. Senator Graham reportedly said in talking about closing Ingleside that this base will close over my dead body as a new port. Well, those are good political statements to make, but you folks come back around and clear them up. Yes, sir. Definitely, there's one thing in the Transportation Administration, whether the authority is there for the random drug testing, and we clarify that in this particular 676. Yes, random drug testing has been found constitutional, and alcohol testing should be included, and we're waiting on the rules and so forth, the findings and rules from the Department of Transportation. They started on 2 years ago, and we're still waiting. Thank you all very much. Thank you a lot, Jim. Thank you very much. You keep going.
We will. We're going to get rid of it.
Yeah. If y'all get him, and y'all are the